How's it going? This is Dylan with DylanPickups.com and Dylan Talks Tone, and today we are doing another video in our series on coil wire. We know that there are a few main types of coil wire that are used on almost every pickup that we hear about. So we'll talk about a few of them. This dark purple stuff that you see here is what is known as plain enamel wire, so we'll talk about that in a minute. This big roll down here is heavy form var, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And this other big roll over here, which almost looks exactly the same, is poly, okay? So it's like a polyurethane. So a lot of people will say, well, I want a vintage spec pickup, so I want this plain enamel wire because that's the way they were made back in blah, 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 okay? And as you know, on this website, we like to get to the bottom of what the difference is and why. And just because something is vintage doesn't necessarily mean anything at all, okay? But there are a couple of differences between plain enamel wire and the poly and the heavy form var that we want to talk about. Does it actually make a difference in your tone? That's a good question, okay? Some of these other wires, this is a special stuff that I've actually got from my wire company that's a completely different kind of coating that I've been doing some testing with. That I really like it, a little bit of a darker sound, okay? And now you hear me say that, and people will say all day long that the type of the wire coating does not matter to the tone of the pickup. And then there are other people that completely swear by it, okay? Well, let's talk about how they make it and what it means. Number one, the way the coating gets onto the wire is basically it's literally dripped onto the wire after the wire has extruded down to whatever wire gauge that it is. So a chemical, whether it be this plain enamel wire that is like a natural enamel resin coming from trees, and it's got some other binders and stuff put into it that's not totally natural, but that's what this stuff is. That's why it's so expensive. It's literally dripped onto the wire as it comes below it, okay? And then it literally goes up like 3-4 stories in these big long coils. This little thin wire goes up like 3-4 stories and comes back down, and it goes through some curing processes, and it's dripped on the wire, and then it's pushed through basically through a hole that kind of like squeegees it to a nominal thickness of, you know, 0.0002, okay, or 0.0004, okay. So we're really talking really small measurements here, but it's literally has a nominal thickness of, you know, 200 thousandths of an inch, super small. And this wire has that thickness. This wire over here has a thicker, it's thicker, but it's put on basically the same way. They literally drip it onto the wire and then kind of squeegee it to a set thickness, and then they allow it to cure, okay? What does that even matter? Why does it matter what they do and the kind of chemical that they use on the wire? And what does it do to your tone? That's the real question we want to know. Basically the thickness, okay? We're gonna get into a whole video about the construction of a pickup and the thickness of the wire and what it does to your tone. But the bottom line is this. When you wind a pickup, the wires lay against each other in a coil, right? Just like they are right here on this wound spool of wire. If the wire is, the coating is thicker, the wires are further apart from each other on the roll, just like they would be on the coil when you wind it for your guitar. The distance between the wires has an effect on the overall efficiency of the pickup, the overall ability for it to be able to make certain frequencies better or worse, which means we hear that term resonant peak, okay? So the overall efficiency, so the inductance and the resonant peak and all that stuff, the overall efficiency of the coil is affected by how close together and how far apart those wires lie when they are in the coil, or like you see here in the spool here. So the thickness of that coating is going to affect that, which means a thicker coated wire is going to sound different than a thinner coated wire, okay? Now what about the type of coating itself? Okay, is that make a difference? Because there's heavy form VAR, there's poly, there's different, and then there's plain enamel. There's actually different chemical compounds of the liquid that is applied to the wire and makes the coating. It's not just a color, okay? This purple wire is a different chemical compound than this gold wire, and this gold wire is a different chemical compound than this gold wire. Does that make a difference? Some people would say no, because they might think that it's, or they might say, because many people do say that it's just down to the thickness of the wire, and there's going to be arguments about this, even about this video when I put it on the internet. The thing is though, is that I'm gonna throw something at you that I want you to kind of mull over and understand. When we talk about capacitance, capacitance happens in everything. We discussed it in our guitar cable videos, we discussed it in our capacitor videos, and we discussed it in our pickup coil wire videos. Because when two wires lay next to each other, something called capacitive loss happens, and it actually kind of gases off energy, if you will, into the other wire, and vice versa, okay? Now the ability for each coating to keep that in, to keep that energy in the wire, is different from one chemical to the next. Can you hear it? That has a lot to do with a few other things in the construction of the pickup. So wind count, wire gauge, and all that sort of stuff, it all kind of plays into it. So does the coating make a difference? On a mathematical and scientific level, yes it does. Can you hear it in your tone from day to day? I'm not going to say that everybody can, but I'm not going to say that nobody can, okay? You can tell the difference depending on other variables. And all that stuff might have to be in the right place for you to hear it. So, you know, this Friday night, when you're playing your gig out at XYZ bar, are you going to be able to tell the difference between a pickup wound with this or a pickup wound with this? Maybe not. But on a mathematical level and on the formula side of it, when we're putting all this stuff together, it does make a difference. The other thing is the actual surface of the wire is different, okay? So when we get into why we wax pot certain pickups and why we could get away without wax potting certain pickups, this wire versus this wire, for instance, we'll also talk about that then. So there are differences in the coatings, not just the color. Is there one worse or better? Absolutely not. There is a common misconception that newer pickups wound with poly wire are not as good as vintage wire pickups wound with plain enamel wire. It's just it's completely bogus, to tell you the truth. And actually, the plain enamel wire that we have today, well, mostly the same as what it was back in the 50s, and actually the brand in particular that I use is probably about as close as you could get. There are certain chemicals that were used back in the 50s that are banned by the EPA now, and you just can't get them. So there's really no sense in saying, you know, I really need this particular vintage wire for such and such. Now, you know, I want new old stock wire from the 50s versus whatever. You start to get a little excessive in what you need when it comes to that. Does it make a difference? Absolutely. It's not just a color, right? The chemical composition of this wire is different from this one. And as you have seen, and we'll talk about in some other videos, we get into some further details as we apply this in the act of pickup making. We'll discuss just how it works. Can everybody hear it? Like we said, maybe not. It kind of depends on the circumstances. But as we get further into how we put this stuff together into the practical act of building a pickup with it, then we will discuss this further, and you'll probably be able to see it. My name is Dylan. This is Dylan Pickups and Dylan Talks Tone. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know, and we will talk to you soon.